Okay, so today we're going to do a deep dive into telehealth.
Sounds good.
Um, it's obviously becoming more and more common, and there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really changes things up.
Exactly. So we've got some great sources here, kind of like a definition of what telehealth actually is, like how it's actually used.
Hmm.
We've got stuff out California in particular, which is always fun.
Absolutely. Always got to know the rules.
Yeah, we'll look at, like when is it even appropriate? Like when should you even consider doing telehealth? What about informed consent? That's always a big deal.
Huge.
Right. And then the whole thing about where it can actually legally happen. Like there's all this jurisdictional stuff, right?
Yeah, crossing state lines gets tricky.
Yeah, it's not as simple as it sounds.
Yeah.
And we've even got some like real world examples,
Mm,
just to kind of bring it all together.
I like that. Makes it practical.
Yeah, exactly. So basically our mission today is to make telehealth like totally clear.
Deconstruct it.
Yeah, whether you're thinking about using it yourself or even if you might be on the other side, providing these services.
Yeah, so much to cover. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is with the standard of care. Like, what are the ground rules, especially in California?
Definitely. So, first and foremost, you absolutely have to be licensed to practice in California if you're going to offer telehealth services here. It's the law.
Right. So you can't just like set up shop online and start seeing clients from anywhere.
Nope, not that easy. And it's worth noting that licensing requirements, they can change from state to state,
Yeah.
but we're
Right.
zeroing in on California today.
Right. That's our focus. Okay. So you've got the license, but there's more to it than that, right?
Absolutely. California has these 6 key areas that really define their standard of care for telehealth, kind of like the pillars of responsible practice.
Okay. So walk me through these 6 points, these pillars. What's number one?
Well, like we just said, number 1 is being licensed in California. You've got to have that foundation.
Makes sense. So what comes next?
Transparency, being upfront about your fees and how payments work. That's number 2. You got to make sure everything is crystal clear from the get-go.
Right. Because no one likes surprise bills, especially when it comes to their health.
Absolutely. And then, super important in our digital world, number 3 is confidentiality, keeping client information secure.
Oh, it's a big one.
Huge. Therapists have to ensure all communication stays private, and they have to let you know immediately if there's ever a data breach.
Yeah, because that stuff happens. And then number 4 is talking about the good and the bad, the risks and benefits of telehealth.
Right. Got to be honest about both sides, so patients can make an informed decision about whether it's even right for them.
Yeah, telehealth isn't a magic solution for every situation.
Nope, definitely not. Okay, number 5, informed consent. This one's essential. In California, a psychologist can't start providing telehealth services without getting your okay.
And that could be verbal or written. Right.
Yes. But either way, they have to document it. It's the law. And it's not just a quick, yeah, sure, whatever. It's a real conversation, making sure you understand what you're agreeing to.
So informed consent, it's like a two-way street, not just a formality.
Exactly. And the final piece of the puzzle, number 6, is about the provider themselves. They have to be competent in delivering telehealth.
So just because someone's a great therapist in person doesn't mean they automatically know how to do it online.
Right. They need the right training, the right tech skills. They need to be able to adapt their techniques for a remote setting.
So it's like a whole other set of skills on top of what they already have.
You got it. And knowing these 6 components can give patients peace of mind. Okay, so we've talked about the standard of care. Now let's say you're actually thinking about telehealth.
Yeah. How do you decide if it's a good fit? Like, when is it appropriate? When is it not?
Well, our sources highlight 5 key factors to consider.
Okay, hit me.
Factor 1 is all about the patient. Their diagnosis, their symptoms, their medical and psychological history, everything. Some conditions might lend themselves really well to telehealth, while others might require that in-person connection.
Right, like you can't do surgery over Zoom, at least not yet.
Right. And then factor number 2 is the client's preference.
Mm.
How do they feel about telehealth?
Yeah, some people might just really prefer face-to-face interaction.
Absolutely. It's their choice, and we have to respect that. Okay, number 3 gets into the nitty-gritty of the services themselves.
Okay, break it down.
So what kind of therapy are we talking about? What are the anticipated benefits of doing it via telehealth? But also, what are the potential downsides? Are there risks, constraints? Like maybe certain types of therapy are just harder to do effectively online.
Right, because you're not in the same room, so you might miss those subtle cues.
Exactly. Number 4 is all about the practical stuff. Where is the client located?
Like geographically.
Yes. Do they have access to emergency services if needed? What about their physical space? Can they have a private, confidential session?
Those are really important things to think about.
Definitely. And then number 5 brings us back to the provider. Is telehealth within their scope of competency?
So it's like a double check. Do they have the skills and the knowledge to do this effectively?
Exactly. It's all about responsible practice.
Right.
Now, here's a little wrinkle, something interesting our sources mention. There are some situations where starting a new patient relationship using just audio is allowed.
So like a phone call instead of video.
Exactly. This can happen if the services are super sensitive, if the patient requests it, or if they don't have reliable video access.
So it's about making telehealth accessible to more people.
Yeah. However, even if a provider starts with an audio-only session, they still have an obligation. If the client says, hey, I'd really prefer meeting in person, the provider either has to offer that option or help them find someone who can.
Okay, that's good to know. So it's not like they can force someone into telehealth if they're not comfortable with it.
Yeah, definitely not.
All right, so we talked about appropriateness, and we briefly mentioned informed consent before, but let's dive deeper into that. What are the specifics, especially when it comes to telehealth?
All right, so big picture. Informed consent is a must, whether spoken and documented or written, before any telehealth services start.
Non-negotiable.
Right. And this consent goes beyond the usual stuff. It has to address the unique issues that come up with remote care.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Sure. First off, risks to confidentiality. Clients need to understand that while therapists take precautions, there are inherent risks when you're sharing personal information online.
It's the internet, right? Nothing's foolproof.
Exactly. And then data storage. Clients need to know where their information is kept, how it's protected, all those details.
So transparency is key.
Definitely. And what about if technology fails? Like what happens if the internet cuts out in the middle of a session? That needs to be discussed.
Right, it's bound to happen at some
Oh,
point.
yeah. And then there's insurance coverage. Clients need to know what their plan covers when it comes to telehealth.
Which can be super confusing.
Oh, totally. And finally, any other reasonable differences between in-person and telehealth need to be covered.
So really laying it all out there, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. No surprises. Okay, ready to tackle jurisdiction.
Oh boy, the legal stuff hit me.
So basically, if you're licensed in California, you can generally provide telehealth to anyone physically located in California, as long as it's appropriate, of course.
Makes sense. So what happens when you start crossing state lines?
That's where it gets tricky. Let's say you're a California psychologist and you're temporarily in Nevada for a conference. Your client is on vacation in Oregon. You need to be aware of the telehealth laws in both Nevada and Oregon, in addition to California's rules.
Wow, so it's not just about where you're licensed, it's also about where the client is.
Exactly. And even in emergencies, if you're providing support to a client in another state, you still have to follow their rules.
So no matter what, you've got to know the laws of wherever your client is located.
Yep. And what if someone moves permanently? Like a client relocates to Texas or a therapist moves to Arizona?
What happens then?
Any ongoing telehealth has to comply with the laws of that new state. Your California license doesn't give you a free pass forever.
So it's all about where you're practicing at that moment.
Right. Now, who keeps tabs on all of this? The California Board of Psychology. They have authority over anyone with a California license, no matter where the services were provided.
So even if you're in another state, California can still hold you accountable.
Yep. And speaking of interstate stuff, let's talk about PSY Pay CT. Have you heard of that?
I have, but I'm not entirely sure what it is.
So PSY Pay CT is basically an agreement between certain states that makes it easier for psychologists to practice telehealth across state lines. But here's the catch. California isn't part of it.
Oh, so it doesn't really apply to us today.
Not directly. But it is a big deal in the telehealth world. Anyway, our sources included some practice questions that highlight the real-world stuff. Want to go through a few?
Absolutely. Let's see how this all plays out in practice.
Okay, so one question mentioned that California law requires psychologists to post a notice in their office. It tells people how to contact the Board of Psychology if they have questions or complaints.
So it's like making sure clients know how to reach out if they need to.
Exactly. Another question was about informed consent. It's stressed that you have to get consent, verbal or written, before providing any mental health services online.
Super important.
Another scenario was about record keeping. Once you've got a patient's records safely stored electronically, you can generally destroy the paper copies.
Interesting. So it's like acknowledging that we're moving towards a paperless world.
Exactly. And then there was a question about client access to their records. In California, a psychologist usually has to provide a summary of those records within 10 working days of the client's request, unless there's a good reason for a delay.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
People have a right to their own health information.
absolutely. Now, some of the questions got into ethical issues too. Like, what if you're a psychologist in a small town and you know a potential client in another context, like maybe they're your kid's teacher?
Ooh, that's tricky.
Right. It's a dual relationship. You have to be really careful about potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah, those boundaries can get blurry.
Absolutely. There was another question about a psychologist who offered free services to a newspaper editor in exchange for some positive press.
Sounds a little shady.
Yeah, it's generally considered unethical. It's like blurring the lines between professional services and paid advertising.
Got it.
And then there was one about soliciting clients. Basically, psychologists can't go around trying to drum up business in person without being asked.
Unless it's like a disaster situation or community outreach.
Right, there are some exceptions.
So it's like respecting people's boundaries.
Exactly.
Okay, wow, we covered a lot today. We talked about the importance of being licensed, especially in California. We looked at the factors for deciding if telehealth is even a good fit.
And we emphasized informed consent. That's crucial.
And then all that stuff about jurisdictions, where you can practice, where your client is, all the legal ins and outs.
And we even touched on some ethical considerations, which were just as important as the legal ones.
Absolutely. So whether you're a healthcare provider or someone thinking about using telehealth, understanding these basics is really key.
Couldn't agree more. It's about making sure telehealth is done responsibly and ethically.
Okay, before we wrap up, here's a final thought for everyone listening. Technology is changing so fast. What new ethical or practical challenges might pop up in the future of telehealth beyond what we've already talked about? It's something to keep in mind as this whole field keeps evolving. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It was a lot to unpack, but hopefully it was helpful.
It was a good one. I think we covered a lot of important ground.
Yeah, I think so too. And, it's just going to keep getting more and more relevant. So stay tuned for more deep dives. We'll be back with another topic soon.
Absolutely. Always more to explore.
All right, until next time.
See ya.